The body arrived the way they always did. Wrong. Not dead, not quite. The man was breathing when the medics pulled him off the transit pad. The breathing was the kind you heard in nightmares. Shallow, wet, irregular, like something inside him had forgotten the sequence. His skin had a gray-blue quality to it that had nothing to do with cold. His fingers were bent at angles that fingers shouldn't achieve without trauma. The attending physician, a woman named Vasquez who had seen everything in 12 years of field medicine, took one look at the x-rays and said, quietly, to nobody in particular, "His organs are not where they're supposed to be." He died 4 minutes later. The only word he had managed to speak, once, or slipping under, was a place name. Dr. Vasquez didn't know the word. She wrote it phonetically in her chart, passed it up the chain. 2 days later, the chain reached Captain Mira Solberg. She was sitting in a prefab office on the edge of the excavation site when the message came. 3, eating a ration bar that tasted like compressed cardboard, and reading a translation of a siege record from the local archive. The dig had been running for 14 months under sponsorship from Nexus Interstellar Systems, a corporation that moved too quietly and spent too freely, or claimed its primary business was logistics. Solberg had been assigned to the site as a cultural liaison. That was the official title. What she actually was the woman the dig team called when something didn't fit. She read the message twice. Then she put down the ration bar and looked out the narrow window at the trenches below, where her team was working in the late afternoon light, pushing dust from stones that had been sealed and silent for 700 years. The place name the dying man had spoken was this place, this site. And the date on the transit record for his departure was not a future date. It was not a present date. It was a date from the past, specifically 4 days ago local time, at this latitude, at this precise grid coordinate. Solberg folded the message, picked up the ration bar, finished it. Then she called her team in. There were 4 of them who mattered in the end. Solberg herself, 38, former deep-range survey corps, the kind of lean that comes from years of eating badly in places that didn't care if you ate at all. She had a habit of tilting her head when she once things that her team read as calm, but was actually calculation. She had a scar along her jaw from a transit accident 6 years ago that she'd stopped explaining. Dr. Aaron Voss, linguist, xenolinguist by training, applied archaeologist by accident and stubbornness. He was 41, wore the same 3 thermal shirts in rotation, translates 17 languages including 2 that were no longer spoken by anyone except him, and a handful of academic databases. He had been the one to first suspect that the dig site was giving them too much, too cleanly. He'd been saying it for months. Nobody had wanted to hear it. Yelokafor, structuralist, 29, the youngest on the team and the quickest. She had the physical grace of someone who'd grown up in low-gravity environments. All long economy of motion. Nothing wasted. She could read a rock formation like a sentence. She'd been the one to actually find the sealed chamber 6 weeks ago, had been methodically not sleeping since, and Tomas Dreyer, former military, current muscle for hire, officially listed as site security. He was 45, built like a man who'd been compressed slightly in some industrial process, and he had the quality of stillness that veterans develop after enough years of waiting for things to go wrong. He kept a compact multi-tool on his belt at all times, and was the only member of the team who had never once expressed surprise at anything the site produced. These 4 were in Solberg's office when she laid out what she knew: the dying man, his displaced organs, the word he'd spoken, transit record. Then she told them the rest of it, the part she hadn't put in the message. 3 days ago, in the sealed chamber, Yale had found something that didn't belong, a small personal item, the kind you carried in a breast pocket, a compact data chip reader, type used for field notation, scorched at one edge. Its manufacture date was current. Its registration number, run through Nexus's personnel database, belonged to Dr. Arjun Teller, the expedition's director, who had left the site 12 days ago to visit Nexus headquarters, and had not been heard from since. Moss looked at the chip reader in its evidence bag for a long moment. Then he said, "When do we leave?" Solberg said, "I don't know if we're going anywhere yet." "We're going," he said. "Not a challenge, just math." Nexus Interstellar Systems occupied a campus in the high desert that had been designed to not be noticed. Low buildings, the color of dust, minimal signage. No visible security perimeter, which meant the perimeter was somewhere else. In the soil, in the air, in systems that didn't announce themselves. The four of them arrived by chartered transport and were met at the gate by a man named Harlan, who had the smile of someone performing the concept of welcome. He took them to a conference room that was too cold and too clean. He offered them drinks. He told them that Director Teller was unavailable, but that the company was very interested in their well-being and very committed to the success of the expedition, Aaron said in a voice of great academic mildness. What is under the monastery? Harlan's smile flickered. I'm sorry. The monastery, Aaron said. At the dig site, the sealed section beneath the north transept. We've been working around it for 4 months on your instruction. We'd like to know why. Harlan looked at Solberg. Solberg looked at Harlan. The temperature in the room felt like it dropped another 2 degrees. Then the door opened, and a woman walked in who was not Harlan and was not performing welcome. Her name was Director Amara Chen. She was 60 years old and had the posture of someone who had never once, in her adult life, been uncertain about where to stand in a room. She sat down across from them, folded her hands and said, "How much of it have you guessed?" "Enough to come here," Solberg said. Chen looked at each of them in turn. The look wasn't hostile. It was the look of someone estimating what they could afford to lose. Then she said, "What we built was not supposed to be a time machine. It was a quantum bridge. Point-to-point displacement, matter-state transfer. The mathematics were clean. The engineering was clean. The test runs were clean." She paused. "The wormhole was not something we found. It was something that found." The physics were beyond Solberg's training. She'd spent enough years doing survey work to understand the shape of what Chen was telling them. A stable aperture, a fixed destination. Not configurable, not adjustable, not a door you could point at any address you chose. A door that opened onto one place, one time. A coordinate locked into the quantum foam of the bridge itself like a knot that couldn't be untied. The coordinate was the dig site, April 7th, 720 years ago. Dr. Teller went through, Chen said. He insisted. I told him the retrieval window. He understood the retrieval window. And then she stopped. Something moved across her face that wasn't bureaucratic. He didn't come back. Yale asked, "What's the retrieval window?" 6 hours, Chen said. After 6 hours, the bridge recycles. Anyone still on the other side stays on the other side. 4 hours and 37 minutes remained on the current cycle. In the silence that followed this information, Tomas reached across the table and picked up the evidence bag with the data reader. He turned it over in his hands once, then he set it down. "What's on the other side?" Solberg asked. Chen looked at her steadily. "A war. They stripped them of everything modern." That was the rule. It had been the rule since the first transit, because the alternative was catastrophic in ways that Chen described, in brief, clinical language that somehow made them worse. You wore what the period wore. You carried what the period carried. You spoke the languages the period used, or you kept your mouth shut. Aaron could speak 6 of the relevant dialects. Yael could pass. Tomas said that not speaking the language had never stopped him from communicating. Solberg, looking at the clothes they'd been given, heavy wool, itchy even through the undershirt, thought that this was the most insane thing she had ever agreed to do, and she had spent 18 months orbiting a gas giant in a survey shell, the size of a shipping container with 3 people she didn't entirely trust. The transit pad was in the lowest sublevel of the complex. Looked like nothing. A clean white floor in a clean white room with a ring of emitters at the ceiling that hummed at a frequency you felt in your teeth. They were given markers, small devices no larger than a thumbnail, bonded to the underside of the wrist with a seal. Activated the return sequence. 2 presses, sustained, activated the emergency beacon. 3 presses, rapid, contingency that Chen had described, with her eyes not quite meeting theirs. Solberg pressed Aaron's marker to check the bond. He pressed hers. Tomas checked his own twice, the way a soldier checks a weapon, not because he doubted it, but because checking was the thing you did. 4 hours, 17 minutes, Chen said from behind the glass. Yale said, "We've mapped the site in 2 dimensions from above. I know every tunnel, Every passage, every structural load point. The tunnels may not exist yet, Aaron said, or they may be constructed differently. Then, I'll figure it out when I'm there, Yale said. This was, Solberg thought, the most human thing she'd heard in the last 3 hours. The universe was incomprehensible, the task was impossible, the timeline was a knife's edge, and Yale's response was, I'll figure it out when I'm there. She loved her team with a ferocity that surprised her. Go! Chen said. The hum rose to something beyond hearing. The room went white. The smell hit first, wood smoke, animal, the cold particular smell of stone that had never known climate control. And under all of it, the distant copper and oil smell of something that was not yet upon them but was coming. They landed in a depression between two earthworks, half screened by brush, a gray sky overhead. The light was early morning, pale, directionless, the kind that made distances uncertain. Somewhere below the ridge, perhaps a kilometer south, a horn sounded, then another, then what sounded like several hundred voices, deciding something together. Battle preparation, Thomas said, without inflection. Solberg got her bearings. The topography matched the site. She'd been looking at this landscape in its excavated form for over a year. Now it stood around her whole and breathing and enormous. The monastery complex was to the northeast. The castle, La Roque, in the period name, was on the promontory to the west, its walls dark with age and the recent rain. Between them, the village was already moving, figures in gray and brown, hurrying through the lanes in the direction of the castle gate. We have 4 hours and, Yale checked the small brass case timer they'd been given. 4 hours, 9 minutes. Teller will be at the castle or in the monastery, Aaron said. Those are the defensible positions. He was a cautious man. Was? Solberg said. Is, Aaron said, and had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. They moved north. The first trouble came within 12 minutes. Solberg would later reflect, was actually quite good given the circumstances. A patrol of 4 soldiers, English by their livery. She recognized the markings from the briefing materials Chen had pushed to their readers the night before, came over the ridge at a trot, scanning the terrain with the professional attention of men who were being paid to find exactly the sort of small suspicious group that Solberg's team represented. Thomas said down, and they went down into the brush. 3 of the patrol passed within 8 meters without seeing them. The 4th stopped. He'd caught a flash of Yale's timer, a small brass gleam in the flat light. He was going to call out. Solberg could see the breath gathering in him. Thomas moved first. Not violently. There was something almost cool about it. He came up from the brush, crossed the distance in 2 seconds, and the soldier's call became a muffled grunt, and then the soldier was seated against the earthwork with his eyes closed, and a knot forming at his. Thomas retrieved the man's rough-woven cloak, held it out to Yale, said, "Cover the equipment," and they were moving again. It had taken 4 seconds. Nobody else looked at them. "You've done this before," Yale said. "Similar situations," Thomas said. "Different centuries." Shh. The monastery's north gate was held by a pair of guards who were old and cold, and clearly not enthusiastic about their assignment. The monastery's interior was dim with candle smoke and organized chaos. Monks moving between the infirmary and the storage rooms, handful soldiers using the cloisters as a staging point, several women who were either refugees from the village or attached to the French. Forces that Aaron had quietly explained were massing to the south. They blended. This was, Solberg had discovered in survey work, the single most important skill in the universe. The ability to look like you belonged. You stood with the same certainty as the people around you. You moved at their pace. You directed your attention at the same things they directed their attention at. The human brain was extraordinary at detecting out-of-place elements, but it was also lazy, and lazy won 9 times in 10. It was Aaron who found the lead. A monk passing with an armload of bandages hesitated at the sight of their group. Specifically at the sight of Aaron's face, which the monk apparently recognized. He said something rapid and low French that Aaron caught and translated in a murmur. "The man from the east, he's in the tower room. He asks every hour if you've come." Thomas looked at Solberg. Solberg felt something unclench in her chest. "Take us there," Aaron told the monk, in the monk's own language. Dr. Argenteller was not the man she'd seen in the personnel file photo. That man had been fit, composed, professionally groomed. The man in the tower room, sitting on a straw pallet with his knees drawn up, wearing the clothes of a lay pilgrim and looking at the door with eyes that had not been sleeping, was what happened to a man after 12 days of understanding that he was 700 years from home and that the margin between going back and not going back was measured in hours. He had, however, maintained his field notes. There was a neat stack of them on the floor beside him, written on whatever paper he'd been able to acquire, the handwriting only slightly more erratic toward the end. He stood when Solberg came through the door. He didn't say anything for a moment. She'd seen this before, the overwhelming of the social protocols by relief so large that the body didn't know what to do with it first. "You came," he said finally. "We found your reader," Solberg said. "It helped. I put it there in case." He stopped. "I didn't think it would work. Put it there anyway." He looked at the four of them, then at the narrow window and its view of a medieval sky. "You have the markers?" "We have 3 hours, 52 minutes, Yale said. "We need to move." Teller bent and gathered his notes. Then he stopped. "There's something you need to know. There are 2 things. The first one is about the castle. The first thing, the English lord who controlled the castle had an advisor, not a local, not a man of the period. A man who had come through the bridge, not in this cycle, not recently, but some transit before the current one, and had stayed. Had chosen to stay, or had been forced to stay, in ways that had cost him things you could see in his face, and hear in the way he moved. His name, in the present, Deckard Voss, no relation to Aaron, and he had been Nexus's chief transit engineer until 3 years ago, when the repeated use of the bridge had begun to do to his cellular structure what it eventually did to everyone who overused it. The company had quietly sidelined him. He had, apparently, stopped being quiet about it. He knew how the bridge worked. He knew when the retrieval window was. He had every reason to make sure they didn't get back through it. "Where is he now?" Solberg asked. "With Durrance," Teller said, "in the castle." "And the second thing?" Teller looked at Yael. "The tunnels, you mapped them from above." "Yes. There's a section you don't have. It runs under the east wall. It was built for exactly the situation that's coming, the French assault. It's how the battle is decided, historically." He paused. "It's so the only route from the monastery to the castle that doesn't cross the open ground where the fighting will be in." He looked at Yale's timer. "In about 2 hours. Yale was already pulling out the brass-cased survey compass she'd been given. Her eyes had gone to the middle distance, place they went when she was reading architecture. "Show me the access point," she said. They spent 40 minutes in the monastery before the first English soldiers came through the gate, looking for them specifically. Someone had talked. Not the monk, Aaron thought, but one of the soldiers who had seen their group entering and matched their description against a port from the patrol team that had not accounted for one of its members. Tomas had left the man alive. It had seemed right at the time. It remained right. Some math you did and accepted. But it meant moving now. The tunnel access was a flagstone in the infirmary cellar that opened onto a passage barely wide enough for Tomas's shoulders. It smelled of cold water and old timber and something organic and earthy that Solberg decided not to identify. Yale went first because she could see geometry in the dark. Or close enough, hands on the walls, reading the structure the way a musician reads rhythm, telling the group where to step and where to duck and when the ceiling dropped. "Left shoulder high," she said, just before a timber crossbeam appeared at head height. "How do you know that?" Teller said, ducking. "I've been looking at the cross-sections of this building, from above, for 14 months, Yale said. "The load distribution patterns in the east wing don't lie." She paused. "Also, I can hear the difference in how the stone breathes where the beam sits." "You can hear stone breathe," Teller said. "Everyone can," Yale said. "Most people aren't listening." They were 70 meters in when they heard the footsteps above them. The soldiers had entered the monastery. There was shouting. Aaron translated in brief fragments as they moved. They were looking for the foreigners, the spies, the ones who'd been asking about the tower room. There was a reference to Durrance, the English commander, being informed. There was also, and this Aaron translated with a slightly different quality to his voice, quieter, more careful, a reference to someone else. A woman. Lady Claire, the monks were saying. She had been brought to the castle the previous evening. Durrance intended to make an example. The historical record, Tomas said in the dark, keeping his voice low. The hanging was recorded, Aaron said. It's documented in 3 separate archives. It was the event that turned the local populace decisively against the English occupation. Without it, the battle doesn't go the way it went. Without the battle going the way it went, history changes, Solberg finished. A silence in the tunnel, the kind that has weight. We're here to retrieve Teller, Tomas said. That's the mission. Yes, Solberg said, another silence. Above them, footsteps moved north, then doubled back. A voice called something, another answered. The soldiers were working the building systematically. Solberg thought about the 3 archives Aaron had mentioned. She'd read 2 of them herself over the course of the excavation. Dry ecclesiastical accounts, the kind written by men who recorded outcomes rather than causes. The event had been catalogued. The name had been noted. But the woman herself was almost invisible in the text, present as a fact, not a person. 3 lines in one archive, a half sentence in the other. Died. Led to the turning of the battle. Remembered. She thought about the tower room. The way Claire had folded her arms against the cold with a composure that was clearly practiced. Not the absence of fear, but the management of it. The discipline of someone who had decided which things she was willing to give ground on and which she was not. 2 hours, 19 minutes, Yale said from 5 meters ahead of them, her voice as neutral as a readout. The tunnel came up in a storage vault beneath the castle's east tower. Yale had found it by sound. The subtle change in the stone's resonance, drip pattern of water that moved differently here than it had for the last 100 meters, the faint whisper of air that meant a space above. She found the lifting point by feel, a recessed iron loop under decades of grime, and she and Solberg lifted the slab together, while Tomas watched the passage behind them, and Teller kept hold of his notes with the grip of a man who, learned over 12 days that the notes were all he had. The vault was empty. The castle above them was not. The sound of it came down through the stone. Boots on flagging, the clash and argument of metal, these layered over, voices in the particular register of people preparing to do violent things, and trying not to think about what that meant. Outside the arrow slits, the morning light had gone flat and gray. The assault would come from the south. Solberg could hear the distant organization of it, horns and drums, and the rumble of machinery. Aaron touched her arm. He pointed to the far end of the vault, where a door stood 3 inches open. Through the door, a corridor. Through the corridor, a stairwell. At the base of the stairwell, 2 guards who were arguing about something with their backs partially turned. Tomas looked at the 2 guards for 3 seconds. I'll need both their cloaks, he said. What happened next took 11 minutes and required Aaron to conduct a conversation in period-accurate Anglo-Norman French that he later described as the most stressful language exercise of his life. It involved impersonating a message from Duranis, a minor confusion about which stairwell was meant, and Tomas standing very still in a doorway with his arms folded and the expression of a man who was not to be questioned. The guards went the wrong way. The stairwell was briefly clear. They found Lady Claire in a room on the 3rd floor that was barely a room, a window, a stone shadesville that served as a bench, a guard outside the door who was very young and very uncertain about why he had been assigned to stand outside a room where a woman sat very quietly. Aaron spoke to the guard. The guard looked at Tomas. The guard moved. Claire was perhaps 25. She had the self-possession of someone who had decided, at some point in the recent past, to stop being afraid of the specific thing that was coming, and redirect that energy towards something more useful. When they came in, she looked at them without flinching and said, in French that Aaron translated almost simultaneously, "You are not from here." "No," said. "You are going to help me." It wasn't quite a question, it had the quality of a test. "We're going to try," Solberg said, and even without the translation, Claire seemed to understand this, because something in her posture shifted. Not relief, not yet. The readiness that comes before relief, the body's preparation. Then Deckard Voss walked through the door. He'd been handsome once. You could see the bones of it, the structure of a face that had been well made. But the transit damage was extensive. He moved with the careful deliberateness of a man managing pain that had become the ambient condition of his existence. His eyes were clear and cold and specific, and they went immediately to Solberg's wrist, to the slight outline of the marker beneath the cloth. "How many cycles?" he said. He was speaking present-day standard. His voice had a rough edge, like the vocal cords had taken some of the same damage as the rest of him. "1," Solberg said. "Lucky," he looked at Teller. "You're going back." "We're all going back," Solberg said. Something crossed Voss's face. Not anger, not quite. Something more complicated. The specific grief of someone who'd had a door close on them, and then watched other people walk through it. "I can't," he said. "You know that." "I know what the company told you," Solberg said carefully. "I've been through the bridge 14 times. You know what that does?" He held up one hand. The fingers didn't quite lie flat. The tendons under the skin ran at wrong angles, like the wiring of a machine that had been repaired too many times with incompatible parts. 14th time was the time they told me I'd never make it to the 15th, so they left me here. Told me it was research. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't research. The sound of the battle below had gotten louder. Something, a ballista bolt, possibly, a section of wall, hit the outer keep with a sound like a giant's fist. "The window closes in 93 minutes, Yale said. She was looking at her timer. She was not looking at Voss. "I know," Voss said. He looked at Claire. Then he looked back at Solberg. And something shifted in him, small and final, like a bolt sliding home. "Duranis is in the Great Hall," he said. "The south passage is clear until the assault reaches the inner gate. 40 minutes, maybe 50. You'll need the horses from the east stable. The fighting will reach the monastery before you do, if you go on foot." Solberg looked at him. "You're not coming. I can't make it back," he said. "I'm telling you what I know. Take it and go." He looked at Claire again. A long, steady look that was layered with 700 years of wrong turns and run-out time. "Take her with you. What happens to her here?" He stopped. It's not what should happen. The historical record." Aaron started. "The historical record was written by the people who survived," Voss said. "Not by her. Go." The south passage was clear. The east stable was where Voss said it would be. The horses were already half panicked by the sound of the assault, whites showing in their eyes, the smell of smoke drifting over the castle walls from the south, where the French forces had fired something. Yale went up the first one like she'd been doing it her whole life, which she absolutely had not, and grabbed the reins of the second for Teller. Solberg got Claire up behind her. Tomas and Aaron took the last two. They came out of the castle gate at a controlled run, attracted attention but not pursuit. The defenders were looking south, not east, and the handful of soldiers who turned at the sound of hoofbeats saw 6 people moving with direction and purpose, and made the same calculation that humans always make when they see that. Not my problem, someone else's orders. The monastery was a kilometer. They made it in 4 minutes. The tunnel was still clear. They went back down into the dark. Claire between Solberg and Aaron, her hand on the wall, no flashlight, nothing but Yale's moving fingers reading the stone ahead and calling back the turns. The timer on Yale's wrist ticked. 51 minutes. The sounds of the battle faded by degrees to a distant bass rumble, then to vibration, to nothing but the cold and the stone and their own breathing. At the monastery end, coming up through the infirmary flagstone, they found the monk. He was crouched at the foot of the stairs with his back to them, and his eyes closed, lips moving, and he didn't turn when they came up, just reached back with one hand and made a gesture that clearly meant be quiet and be fast. They were quiet. They were fast. The open ground between the monastery and the transit coordinate was the problem. There was no cover, no feature, the feature of the landscape that screened the 300 meters between the monastery's north wall and the depression where they'd arrived. The battle had moved. The French assault had breached something to the south, and the English defense had contracted, pulling back toward the castle, but the perimeter of that contraction was fluid and fast and happening now. From the monastery's north gate they could see it, the disciplined French cavalry reforming on the south slope, banners moving against the gray sky, the slower mass of infantry advancing through the smoke that had begun to thicken at the castle's base. The castle's outer gate was gone, or what remained of it was on fire, which amounted to the same thing. Somewhere in that fire and that movement, the battle that the archives had recorded was finding its shape. They had 38 minutes and 300 meters of open ground. 38 minutes, Yell said. We need to run, Solberg said. The 6 of us running across open ground, Tomas said, will be visible to anyone who looks north. Then we run fast, Solberg said. Tomas thought about this for about 1.5 seconds. Then he said, yes. They came out the north gate at a sprint. The ground was uneven, the grass long and wet from the morning, the soil soft enough in places to catch a heel and send you down. Solberg kept her eyes on the depression ahead and let her body handle the ground, the way it had learned to handle uneven terrain in years of survey work. Not thinking it, just doing it, trusting the body's knowledge to be faster than the mind's. She could hear the others beside and behind her. Yale light and quick on her left, Tomas steady as a metronome. Teller's breathing harder than the others but still in control. Claire ran the way she rode. With the whole body, nothing held back, her Medivh skirts gathered in both hands, eyes forward, jaw level. Iran ran with the particular desperate efficiency of a man who spent most of his time in libraries and was making a pointed argument to the universe that this did not mean he couldn't run. A shout from the left. English, Aaron said, without stopping, a patrol seeing them, determining threat level. The determination took 3 seconds. The 3 seconds were enough. They were 50 meters clear when the first arrow came. High and wide, the archer having shot on instinct without properly gauging the range. The second arrow didn't come because Tomas had turned at a 45-degree angle without breaking stride. And the third patrol member had apparently decided that sprinting foreigners were not worth a courtyard full of French cavalry. The depression was ahead. The coordinates were exact. Solberg knew this place, had spent 14 months looking at its excavated bones, and she recognized it the way you recognized a face you'd last seen young. The same, and different, and unmistakably the same. 26 minutes, Yale called, going down into the hollow. Teller slid down after her, still holding his notes, and Solberg thought, he never let go of those notes. Not once, not through the tunnel, or the castle, or the ride, or the run, and that was so specifically, so stubbornly human that she almost laughed. Was last. She came down into the hollow and stood in it, looking around at the unfamiliar depression, as if trying to read its purpose. And then she looked at Solberg with the direct, testing quality she'd had in the room in the castle. Except now the test was different. Not can I trust you? Not are you real? Something older and stranger, where are you from? Aaron spoke to her, low French, gentle, explaining, trying to. Claire listened with her arms folded against the cold and her chin level, and she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said something that Aaron translated, slowly. She says she's not afraid of what's strange. She says where she comes from, the strange things are the ones that last. What she couldn't prepare for, what none of them had been prepared for, was Voss. He came over the ridge as they were setting the transit sequence, alone, moving fast for a man, carrying the weight of what the bridge had done to him. No horse. He'd run it. His face was wet, either rain or exertion, and his hand was pressed against his side like he'd taken something, a graze from fighting maybe, or just the damage asserting itself, the body reminding him of its terms. Solberg saw him first. I thought, she said. 14 times, he said, coming down into the hollow, breathing hard. They told me 14 was the limit, but they were working with data from the early prototypes. He stopped in front of her, the new shielding in the markers. You have the upgraded generation. He looked at her wrist. I was looking at the wrong variable. The damage isn't from the bridge. It's from the unshielded transit, with the markers bonded to the skin. You don't know that, Solberg said. No, he said. I don't. He looked at his own hand, at the fingers that didn't lie flat. But I don't know the other thing either, and you're here, and the window's closing. 11 minutes. Solberg looked at Tomas. Tomas looked at Voss with the assessment of a man calibrating risk, then gave a single short nod. She looked at Yale. Yale was already checking the transit sequence, counting bodies, adjusting for the added mass. You have a marker? Solberg asked. No, Voss said. Tomas took his marker off his wrist. The seal broke with a small sound. He held it out. Bond time is 30 seconds, he said. You'll be sore. It doesn't matter. Voss looked at the marker in Tomas's hand for a moment that had years in it. Then he took it. The window, Yale said. 8 minutes. 3 minutes in, the English patrol found the depression. 6 of them on foot. and whoever was leading them had the specific focus of a man following a trail. They came over the North Ridge with swords already drawn, which meant someone had briefed them, and the briefing had included. These are not simple travelers. Tomas went up to meet them before they came down. This was tactically correct, the high ground, the narrow approach, and it was also something else, the specific selflessness of a man who understood exactly what he was trading his position for. The first two went down fast. The third was better, and the exchange lasted 40 seconds and cost Tomas something in his left arm. A long, shallow cut that bled spectacularly and mattered very little. The remaining three looked at the man in front of them, at the two on the ground, at each other, and made a collective assessment. They withdrew. Tomas came back down the slope, pressing his right hand against his left forearm, still moving at a normal walking pace, blood dark on his sleeve. He looked at Solberg. "I'm fine," he said. "Call the sequence. 2 minutes." The transit was not like sleep. It was not like anything. There was the hum, the rise, the white, and then the cold and the smell and the press of the universe against the inside of your skull as everything. Your body knew about its own position in space, and time got rewritten in a flash. Solberg had been warned about this. The warning had not been adequate. She was on her knees on the transit pad for 3 seconds before she could stand. Beside her, Yael, already standing, one hand on the wall. Iran, sitting, pressing his fingers to his temples, with the expression of a man failing to process a very large file. Teller, still holding his notes, somehow still on his feet by what appeared to be pure academic stubbornness. Voss, on his knees beside her, his transplanted marker still bonded to his wrist, not dead, not obviously dying. His eyes were open and clear. And he was looking at his own hands with the intense attention of someone checking for damage they'd been told was coming. His fingers lay flat. He looked up at Solberg. She looked back. Neither of them said anything, because there was too much in the space where words should go. The glare came through. She arrived the way none of them had, upright, perfectly balanced, as if her body had simply decided that physics was a matter of confidence and had proceeded accordingly. She looked around the sterile white room, with the emitters and the glass observation wall, and Director Chen on the other side of it. Chen's hand pressed flat against the glass, and she didn't flinch, and she didn't look away. She looked at everything once carefully, the way she'd looked at Solberg in the castle room, not frightened, but assessing, taking inventory of the strange new world, the way a person takes inventory of a room they're going to have to live in. Tomas was last. He came through bleeding and upright, and walked directly to the medical bay door, and opened it, and sat down on the examination table and said, to the medic who appeared, "Left forearm. It's not deep. Clean it and seal it, and tell me if you see anything else worth mentioning." The medic looked at him, looked at the rest of them, looked at the woman's in medieval French clothing standing in the middle of a quantum transit facility looking at the ceiling with an expression of pure, contained wonder. The medic said, "I'm going to need more forms." The debrief lasted 3 days. Solberg gave it all. The route, the tunnel coordinates, the exchange with Voss, everything she'd seen and measured and calculated. She gave the parts about Director Chen's choices and Nexus's withholding of critical safety data, and she gave those parts to people who were not Nexus, people in the kind of offices that had jurisdiction over companies that built wormholes in the desert and sent human beings through them without full disclosure. She gave it plainly and completely, without editorializing, and then she answered the same questions again from different people at different levels of alarm. There was a moment, late in the second day, when one of the investigators, a precise woman from the regulatory authority who had the look of someone who'd seen significant corporate malfeasance but not, previously, any involving temporal mechanics, asked Solberg to describe what it had felt like, not what happened, what it felt like. Solberg thought about this for a moment. "There's a version of it," she said. "That feels like the most important thing you've ever done. And there's a version of it that feels like the most ordinary thing you've ever done. And they're both the same version." The investigator looked at her. "That's not very scientific." "No," Solberg agreed, "but it's accurate." Teller's notes, it turned out, were extraordinary. 14 months of surviving in the 14th century had produced something that no excavation, above could replicate. A primary source, contemporary, annotated by someone who knew exactly what they were documenting and why it mattered. He defended them to 3 separate review panels with the slightly feverish energy of a man who had decided that the notes were the point, were the reason it had been worth it, were the thing that turned a terrible and terrifying experience into something that had a shape and a purpose. He slept 12 hours between each panel. Then he got up and went back. There was one afternoon between the second and third review when Solberg found him in the facility's small cafeteria, sitting with a cup of coffee, going cold in front of him, and his notes spread on the table, not reading them, just looking at them. 14 months of handwriting, some of it cramped and careful, professional notation of a man keeping records, some of it looser, hurried. The margins filled in with observations that weren't quite professional, the things you noticed, when you were the only person from your century, and the absence of everything familiar stripped your perception down to its raw elements. "I keep thinking I should apologize," he said when Solberg sat down, "for not coming back when I was supposed to, putting all of you through it." "You didn't choose to stay," Solberg said. "No," he said, "but the first 2 weeks, before the window closed," he stopped. "There were moments when I thought, maybe I should stay, document it properly, see it through." He picked up his coffee, found it cold, set it down. "I didn't, but I thought it." Solberg looked at the notes, at the dense, careful handwriting, and the other handwriting that was something else. The record of a man living inside a situation rather than studying one. "That's not a failure," she said. "That's just being human." Voss spent the first day in the medical facility, which he described afterward as the most comprehensively uncomfortable day of his life, and also the best. The cellular repair that the new shielding enabled was not complete. Would not be complete, the doctors said, possibly for years. But it was ongoing. The fingers that didn't lie flat lay a little flatter each morning. He didn't talk about the years in the past directly, not to the debrief teams, not to anyone. What he talked about instead, when he talked at all, was the engineering. The variables he'd gotten wrong. The corrections he would make. He talked about it the way a person talks about work they're not finished with. Claire was given a suite of rooms in the Nexus facility, while the lawyers did what lawyers do to the fabric of reality when reality has been egregiously mishandled. She was given a language tutor, a cultural liaison, and a standing offer of whatever she needed. What she needed, turned out, was to understand everything. She was not patient. She had survived the 14th century and 700 years of gap in one transit jump and her brother's war and a castle room and a tunnel and a mad gallop across open ground under a sky that was trying to kill everyone in. And she had done all of this with her chin level and her assessment intact. She approached the 21st century the same way. She read everything. She questioned everyone. She had opinions, immediate and specific and usually correct. Solberg visited her on the second day, bringing coffee, which Clara she approved of. "Your colleague," Claire said, nodding at the window in the direction of the medical facility. "The damaged one." "Voss," Solberg said. "He told me, when he came in the castle, before you arrived, that he had been waiting a long time to do something that mattered." Solberg looked at her. "He was not well," Claire said. "He was in much pain. But he helped me stay alive until you arrived. He taught me which guards to avoid, where the exits were. He told me about the tunnel." She paused, wrapping both hands around the coffee cup. "He said he didn't know if he would go back. He said the machine might kill him." "It might have," Solberg said, "but he came anyway." Yes, Claire thought about this. She looked at the coffee in her cup, the dark surface of it, the particular smell, with the same careful inventory she brought to everything. She had tried 16 different foods and drinks in the past 48 hours and evaluated each one with the thoroughness of a scientist with limited test data and a genuine commitment to the results. Coffee had ranked high. She had noted this without visible emotion. Solberg was beginning to understand was not the same as feeling nothing. Outside the window, the high desert stretched pale and enormous under a sky that was the same sky it had always been, just younger by 7 centuries. She turned the coffee cup in her hands once, twice. "Where I come from," she said, and Solberg recognized the echo. The same thing she'd said through Aaron in the hollow, The same thing that had been true then and was apparently still true now. The strange things. The ones that last. 8 months later, the transit bridge was shut down by order of 3 separate regulatory bodies across 2 continents. The wormhole, stripped of its infrastructure, collapsed within 72 hours, precisely as the Nexus engineers had predicted it would not. Teller published his notes. They were, by some margin, the most significant historical document of the decade, and he spent 2 years explaining why, in lectures and papers and interviews. With the patient persistence of a man who had bought the knowledge at a price he still occasionally woke up at 3 a.m. thinking about. Voss joined the regulatory team as a technical consultant. His expertise was irreplaceable. His fingers continued to improve. He went back to visit the excavation site once, alone, early morning, and stood at the edge of the trench for a long time without saying anything to anyone. Published a structural analysis of the tunnel system that rewrote the existing understanding of 14th century defensive engineering, and was cited in 47 subsequent papers, which was the most validation she had ever received for anything, and which she accepted with great equanimity and no visible change in behavior. Tomas's arm healed cleanly. He went back to work. Solberg took 3 weeks of leave. She spent at her sister's house in the mountains, eating actual food, and sleeping 9 hours a night and thinking, in the way you think, when the urgency has lifted and the adrenaline has burned off, and what's left is the thing itself, stripped of its emergency casing. She thought about the transit, the tunnel, the specific weight of the decision made in the hollow when the window was closing, and and a man stood in front of her with damage in his hands and hope in his eyes and no certainty about how it would end. She thought about Claire's face when she came through the transit, upright, balanced, looking at everything, not frightened, never frightened. Just, what is this? What does it mean? What do I do with it? She flew back on a Sunday. She had a message waiting from Iran. The university had contacted him about a new sponsored excavation, different site, different company, different century, well, different era. Medieval North Africa. The sponsor was clean. The funding was legitimate. The site was extraordinary. Did she want in? She made herself coffee. She stood at the window of her apartment and looked at the city, the ordinary breathing city, doing what cities do. She thought of the sealed chamber, and the data reader, and a message in handwriting 600 years old. She thought about sprinting 300 meters across open ground with 5 people she trusted, and the window closing. She replied, yes. Then she drank her coffee and started packing.